It's time for businesses to start preparing their annual budgets for 2013. The current economic cycle has forced businesses to sharpen their pencils on the cost side, but also to set realistic income goals. For managers who are under pressure from executives to always budget up, they may be shooting themselves in the foot by setting unrealistic metrics, which they will be held accountable for. How do managers set realistic goals or metrics to keep everyone happy? For more on Finweek's Jessica Hubbard, we've got and Marius Rezelman, Managing Director at PSP Icon. Now, we know that companies are in their budgeting phases because if you are in a media company like myself, you're engaging with those corporates, trying to get a bit of their spend as they move into 2013. So where do you start as a corporate? And I think it goes back to setting realistic goals and not shooting yourself in the foot with unrealistic expectations.
Yes. It's always interesting to understand that when one looks at budgets, there's a dichotomy because one can try and be as accurate as possible, but that doesn't necessarily make the shareholders happy. So managers often have this frustration that they've got to make a call as how much growth do we actually put in this budget or how accurate are we? And then there's the second component, is that budgets often are looked at as an operational one-year cycle or exercise. But taking into account that one has to also consider when that business gets out of the recession or the down cycle, is the business still going to be competitive thereafter? So how do you actually blend those aspects? How do we make sure that there's cash around, but also how do we make sure that we are in a good position when the economy gets better again? And those are some of the challenges that some of our clients face and ask us for advice about.
So you say take a longer term view. This is not just a 1 year, 12-month exercise.
I say it's a bit of both, because one has to understand that when times are tough, shareholders are looking for cash. Let's take the mining industry as an example. 5 years ago, when there was a lot of cash around, there was growth. At the moment, the organizations and the companies that are actually able to make sure that they're bringing cash to the party are actually delivering. So it's actually cutting down on some of those growth expansion goals, etc., but making sure that the shareholders are happy in these tougher times, but not losing sight of the fact that both have to be considered in these tougher times.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes through, if you think about, one thing that we do very differently to the US is they have quarterly reporting versus our annual and interim reporting. Now, there was some interesting research done between German and US businesses, for instance. So US businesses obviously report quarterly, and we saw it last night. Apple missed their they met expectations, but the outlook was worse than expected. Share price gets hit. There's immediate knee-jerk reaction from analyst community, shareholders, etc. Germany, what was quite interesting is they don't do it on a quarterly basis. Yes, there are listed companies do, but there's more emphasis on 6-month and annual reporting than there is on short-term reporting. And they did some studies around the labour market, and what happens is with the German labour market, it's far more stable than the US, which sort of, when you miss earnings, you quickly chop everything, and then you kind of say, well, next one I make it, and whereas Germans tend to keep theirs much smoother over an extended period of time. I think the reason I find this topic very interesting is this knee-jerk expectation. So you've got managers in the middle who are probably not great at managing budgets, and I think corporates have to be very honest with themselves. They are not good at managing. They do not have a lot of the financial skills. You tend to find that one person tends to be the kind of kingpin around it, and they manage to a spreadsheet that they know about and nobody else has it. So what happens, they go down the chain and they say to me, or to whoever the underlying employee is, I need to do X, my income needs to be this, and my income has to go up, my expenditure has to go down, and you must deliver it. And nobody will take the bull by the horns and say that can't actually happen.
Are companies being cautious in this budgeting cycle with all the uncertainty out there? What is the temperature on the ground? Do you have any idea, Jessica?
From what I pick up, I'm talking to CEOs, particularly in the IT sector. They are definitely having to cut their budgets, and some are reacting quite drastically to it. So it seems to be, they almost seem to be overreacting. So when the economy turns around, they may not be positioned to take advantage of the upswing. So I think companies need to be a little bit more balanced and be perhaps less reactionary, and sort of look towards the next 5 years as opposed to the next year.
Marius, that goes back to your point, and perhaps the key that executives have got to ask themselves is how not to cut into the muscle of the business.
That requires planning. Now, when times are good, Budgeting seems to be something that you just look at the past and you try and predict that the same is going to be in the future. However, in turbulent times, that's not the case. So one has to start saying, well, where is that fat? And one can't identify that when it's too late. You actually have to know where that fat is and be quite ruthless in cutting it out when it's an appropriate time. So the whole concept of planning, and Mark, the point you made is some of the managers don't actually get the budgeting thing. It's been too easy to be a manager. Let's minimize change. Let's just do what we did last year. And the executives and the leadership actually have to start playing a role here in providing that guidance that is necessary.
And I think one of the things that's also seeming to come through now is businesses are reacting quicker to problems. I mean, and maybe it is being done late, but you do get the sense that now when things look bad for the next 6 months, they're cutting quite quickly and they're being quite decisive about it. I mean, I don't think South Africa lends itself, often the biggest cost is sort of 75% are around staff costs. So, and the impact there is how do you invest with the right staff with it going down the line. But I think people are running quite lean businesses going forward.
I think particularly in South Africa, we need to make sure that we're cutting where there's sort of non-essential spending. So perhaps entertainment or travel or business like dining expenses. Those things should be the first to be cut, whereas often companies and the managers don't want to make those tough decisions and they want to keep their clients pleased with long liquid lunches and things like that. You need to be ruthless, as you said, but you also need to take a stance, and the leaders need to demonstrate by doing and cut down on their travel, cut down on their lunch expenses, and run a lean business, but lean where it makes sense.
But it's not only, Bronwyn, it's not only the cost side, and often budgeting is looked at the cost side. Yeah. One has to start looking at the revenue side as well. And the revenue side is where they're quite crucial aspects that the latest buzz is around price elasticity. Yep. And understanding the trade-off between volume and profits, understanding the portfolio of products that you have, understanding which of those are cross-subsidizing others. Also important is to start understanding your customer, because your customer is going through similar tough times. So this is an important time to open dialogue with your customers so that you can satisfy them. What are the leverage points that they want? Is it trade discounts? Is it bulk volume? How do you ensure that you can actually get that? Because when it swings around, those clients will remember you.
But I think to that point, that's we've talked about the cutting side of it, but the case of investing in a strong financial manager is still not done. I mean, there are a lot of businesses that don't. The financial manager is kind of the guy that does all the back end stuff. They're not at the forefront of leading a business. And I use the example all the time. If you look at the Entrepreneur of the Year competitions, a number of them that come through, they come from CFA. They're accountant, they're numbers guys. And the reason that they're successful is they've worked out price points. They've worked out how to actually profit from what they've got. And I think that one of the biggest frustrations for a lot of businesses, and you see it whether it's a JSE listed business, it's always the numbers guy that is either your strength or weakness. And if you don't have a strong numbers guy and you don't invest in that person and give them the power, don't have them doing the sort of back end stuff and just hoping that your numbers are going to match up. I think you need a strong numbers guy.
Perhaps something else to throw into the pot at the moment is the lack of visibility, which I referred to earlier, and that must have many managers and executives confused, because, and I've just thought of an analogy now, it's like scuba diving, and the water is murky, you can't see, the vis is very poor. That's how companies or company executives must be feeling right now. It's very difficult to know which direction to turn and whether to gear up because suddenly the economy is going to come on stream and everything's going to be great, or whether we're going to see a complete meltdown of the global economy, and obviously South Africa follows suit later down the line. Are they having those conversations with you?
They are having those conversations, and the key point to look towards is understanding the concept of lead and lag indicators. Now, organizations that can see the lead indicators in their business and start saying, well, when we see that happening, we can understand that this is what is going to be the result thereof, are much better positioned than ones that wait for that lag indicator, and then often that's too late to try and respond.
Are you saying now scenario planning?
I'm saying scenario planning, but I'm also saying in the operational cycle, is if you're starting to say, let's say a downswing or exchange rate swap, one quickly can say, well, we're going to see a result in that either in weeks or months, or in the other type of the other changes, like the Chinese economy going down, there will be a longer strategic implication that you may need to start looking towards different offerings, different manufacturing, different products.
So
that you
set a
offer, et
nimble
cetera.
strategy
Yeah,
then.
and I
Spot
think
on.
that's one of the things. I mean, we've seen it quite a lot in dealing with some. We've got this entrepreneurship program that you got going. One of the biggest tools that they've actually got is a dashboard to tell them where, what are their metrics. And it sounds very simplistic, but just simply tracking earnings habits and comparing them year on year. A lot of businesses don't do it. They don't work out what their revenue cycle is, and suddenly they realize, hold on a second, I'm 10, 20% off where I should be, and I didn't see it coming. But if you literally put them up against each other, you'd have said it's actually, you have had some indicators coming that this is coming, that this is happening.